Hey guys, how's it going? It's Friday again, and time to make another video. This time I'm going to try to make a video I've been meaning to make for a while, but just been putting off, so I wanted to kind of prepare my thoughts and get my thoughts in order and make a decent video of this. I've been watching videos from a young guy here on YouTube. His name is Jody Watson, and he's been amassing a pretty amazing collection of like hard rock music, a lot of stuff I was definitely into, probably when I was his age or even a little bit younger, back in the 80s, late 80s, and especially Gary Moore. He was one of my favorites, and Michael Schenker, and it really kind of brought back some memories of probably the days when I was most heavily into collecting records, going to record shops and flea markets and record collector shows and picking up a lot of stuff. So I've been really wanting to make a video to show off the stuff I have now. Unfortunately, I unloaded a lot of my collection that I had from back in the day, and I'll get into that later in the video, but I've started to kind of build it back up, the stuff that was really important to me. But I want to kind of make I'll probably make it two videos. I'll make one video that's just showing the actual records I have and talking about the artists I like. But this first video I want to make, kind of talking about my my history, my background. I kind of started out really into kind of prog rock back in the early 80s, and then over the course of a few years really started getting into the, not quite heavy metal, but I guess I'd call it like European hard rock stuff, like Gary Moore and Michael Schenker and the Scorpions and all that. So yeah, that's my intention. I'll apologize if the editing's a little rough. I've kind of laid out like a little kind of outline of what I want to talk about, so hopefully I can get through this pretty smoothly, so hang in there, okay? So I just made a video recently where I talked about kind of my history with personal listening devices, and I noted that I started out really in about 83, I think it was. I got my first Walkman portable cassette player with just little cheap headphones with the low foam pads on and stuff, but that was a Christmas present that really changed my life. You know, I'd listen to a lot of stuff on the radio, but to actually be able to pick what you want to hear and just play it when you want to play it was awesome. So as I mentioned, some of the first things I had on cassette were, I was really big into the Yes 90125 album. I really liked hearing that on the radio. So this is actually the single for An Over Lonely Heart. I don't have 90125 on vinyl for some reason. I guess I'm looking for a really pristine copy. And then another big one I was into was Asia. Everybody knows Asia. And then Genesis, I had the, I think it was a self-titled album from about 83, like Home by the Sea, and I had Abacab on cassette. And soon after I got another Yes album. For some reason just picked out Close to the Edge, kind of at random. And it seemed kind of strange that it, you know, I got an album from like 83, and then I've got this from, I don't know what, about 72, and there wasn't a huge disconnect in my mind. It seemed okay, you know, like I was okay with it being the same band, even though it was 10 years apart and the music was quite a bit different. But yeah, I was really into that kind of the prog pop, kind of, you know, the 80s prog, where it kind of got a little, songs got shorter and a little more concise, and maybe even a little heavier, a little more synthesizer, kind of the 80s sound to it. But you know, like I said, I had the Close to the Edge, and I started to really get into the older prog rock music. But that was 83, and about 84, 85, I think it was a year or two later, my brother got for Christmas a boombox. Nothing real fancy, but it was like a General Electric's, pretty decent size. And started collecting CDs, or not CDs, cassettes. And I think he did like the Columbia House record club thing, got cassettes from that. But he was more into like the British kind of classic rock stuff, like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, The Who, The Kinks, T-Rex, things like that. Whereas I was more up in the clouds with my prog rock stuff. So that was kind of what he was listening to. And kind of got jealous. I wanted something a little better to listen to music on. I just had the Walkman, so I guess it was about 85, maybe, yeah, probably about 85 for Christmas. My parents got me like one of these all-in-one stereo units. It's got like the cassette deck in the bottom and the tuner and turntable on top. It's all built together, not separate units. And so I started collecting records. And I remember going to Peaches, which is like a record store chain. I don't even know if they're still around, but they had one in Clearwater. And went, and two of the first records I bought, I've got these records, these are actually the British presses, but I bought the first one from Yes, just titled Yes. It has a different cover, the American pressing. Picture of them, and then the Yes logo kind of above it, I think. And then I bought Time and a Word. So the very first two Yes albums, which are quite different even from Close to the Edge, and radically different from 90125, but still really got into them, really enjoyed them. And then I started buying a lot of used records, you know, just going around to record shops and you know, flea markets, things like that. And I picked up, like, you know, more Yes. I was really into Yes. They were like my favorite band, I guess, at the time. Got like Fragile, and started to get more into the out there stuff like Relayer. I love this album. And started to get into the Yes solo projects, and the one that really probably my favorite is Chris Squire, Fish Out of Water. I think I got this, but this is my second copy, but I got my first one at the flea market. And started collecting albums just with the cover art by Roger Dean, who did most of the Yes albums, or not most of them, some of the early ones. So I got both of his books. I had Magnetic Storm. I actually gave that to a friend who was going away to college, to architecture school, a couple years ahead of me. I gave him my copy of that for I don't know what reason, but he was really into it and it seemed like a nice gift. But yeah, just kind of some of that looks like a Green Slate album cover there, but you know, my head was always in the clouds. I was in all the prog rock and the dreamy music and stuff like that. So kind of the point I'm getting at, I didn't start out into the hard rock that much. Yeah, I'd listen to my brother's Led Zeppelin stuff and Black Sabbath, and I enjoyed it, but for my own personal stuff, I was mostly collecting prog stuff probably till towards the later 80s. I got into Emerson, Lake and Palmer, one of my favorite albums by them, Trilogy, and then the live one, Pictures at an Exhibition. And like I said, I started collecting all the Yes solo stuff, some of it not so good, but one I remember finding at a store up in, I'm pretty sure I got this in a store up in Hudson, which is, if you know Florida, it's on the west coast. If you go north from Clearwater, you go through Dunedin, Tarpon Springs, Newport Richey, and finally hit Hudson. Back then it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Now it's just part of the in the sprawl of US Highway 19 that runs down the west coast of Florida. But I have a really vague memory of going there with my mom. I think I'd looked in the phone book and managed to find this record store, and I said, I want to see it. I've never been to this record store. And I know I bought a Bruford album, Bill Bruford, his solo band, but I can't remember which one it was. I think it may have been this actual record. This is One of a Kind. This may be the one. Probably about, I want to say about 86 or 1987. I think I'd been to this flea market a few times already. My mom used to take me on the weekends. She was big into flea markets. And I remember going through the flea market, and I'd stop in the little stalls and people would have some kind of old beat up records. And then I don't know if it was the first time I'd been to the flea market or if I'd been a few times and they just opened this shop. But I remember going down an aisle and seeing like a big, I think it was like a big banner or something that said Aces Records, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And it was like 4 flea market stalls just opened up into one huge record shop, and walking in and just being like, oh my god, you know, what is this? It was amazing. Like I said, I've been saying I was into prog rock at the time, Yes, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff like that. So when I walked in, I kind of looked through the records, and it didn't really sink in what the whole theme of the shop was at the time. But you know, I was looking through the records, and I saw these records I'd never seen before by Led Zeppelin and by Yes. And I remember I told my mom, and we got on the phone to my brother at home. This is in Oldsmar. It's the Oldsmar Flea Market, which is like west of Tampa. you know, probably about half an hour away from my home. But we called my brother and I said, John, you won't believe this. I found these records by Led Zeppelin. I've never seen them before. They're like concert recordings, you know, they're cool. And I was so naive, I didn't know what a bootleg record was. I was just clueless. And he said, well, I said, you want me to get them? And he said, I guess so. And he worked out some deal with my mom that she would loan him the money. He'd have to pay her back with allowance or something. And anyway, we bought like 3 or 4 of these records, these bootleg records at Led Zeppelin. And, you know, just totally naive, didn't know what they were. And then I remember going back, like the next time I bought like some Yes bootleg records, and I think I may have bought a cassette. They had a whole bunch of bootleg records, but they also had bootleg cassettes. I just remember like they all had like, you know, the artwork paper inside the cassette thing. They were all like different colors, like pink and yellow and blue, like these pastel colors that they'd, you know, just photocopied. Mass production, but they had like a whole rack of these bootleg cassettes. I just thought that was the coolest thing. So that was kind of cool, but I wasn't really getting the theme of the store. I don't know why it didn't sink in. And then probably like the next year, about '87, 2 things happened. One, I gotten into some trouble at home. My brother was playing JV football at the time, and I used to hang around with a friend of mine. We've been friends for years, since middle school. And so we're now like sophomores in high school, I think. And so my parents are off at my brother's JV football game, and I'm home alone hanging out with my friend, and we were a couple of juvenile delinquents. And so we're playing in the driveway. We're bored, so I dig out some lamp oil from the garage my parents had, and we're pouring it on the driveway and like lighting it on fire. Well, it's probably about 5 o'clock at night. The sun's still out, and the thing with this lamp oil is you can't, it's not like a bright red orange flame. You don't see it that well, and so we're lighting it. It doesn't seem like it's lighting, and they're like, oh, that kind of sucks. We used to like, you know, setting off fireworks and setting stuff on fire and watching it burn. And so I decided to get the gasoline tank, you know, my dad used for the lawnmower, and I go to pour a little bit of gasoline out on the driveway to make a little puddle and light on fire. Well, the gasoline, as I'm pouring it out, it hits the lamp oil, and the lamp oil is burning. You just can't see the flames. They're like blue flames or something. And all of a sudden, boom, these huge flames from the gasoline spark up, and I think I dropped the can and panicked. And more gasoline's pouring out of the can. The flames are getting higher. These flames are probably like 10 feet high, I swear to God. And the sun's finally starting to set down, so it's even more dramatic. It's darker outside, and these flames are huge. And luckily my friend had the good sense to like run over and kick the can, kick it across the driveway into the grass, so it's not just feeding more gasoline into the fire. And I'm just kind of in shock. I'm just standing there like, holy crap, you know, just didn't know what to do. And finally came to my senses and ran and got the hose, and I'm spraying down the driveway and putting the flames out. And it's crazy because it's about 5:30 at night. You know, people are starting to come home from work, and you know, we got these 10-foot tall flames in the driveway. It's just ridiculous. So we put out the fire and hosed down the driveway, and got the gasoline tank and put it back in the garage, gas can, and I can't find the cap. You know, in the commotion, I've lost the cap to the gas can. But I'm like, you know, whatever. That's not the most important. The most important thing is to like hose down the driveway and clean up the crime scene here, sort of. So about half an hour later, my friend goes home. About half an hour later, my parents come home, or an hour later or something. And the first thing I ask is, Mike, why is the driveway all wet? And I kind of lie, I don't know. Oh yeah, we were playing with the hose in the driveway. And my dad's like, why does the driveway smell like gasoline? Well, ended up that, you know, I had to admit what happened, and so I got into some serious trouble. And it was coming up on summertime came along, or I guess it wasn't quite summer. When summertime came along, my mom said, look, you know, after what happened with the driveway, we're not letting you stay home. You have to come to work with me. She was working as a medical transcriptionist at the time, typing up medical records, and so it's kind of humiliating. You know, I couldn't stay home by myself anymore. She didn't trust me. So she's like, look, you got 2 choices. You can sit there quietly and like read a book or something, or, you know, if you want to, I can show you what I'm doing and teach you what I'm doing. Yeah, I went along. I said, okay, show me what you're doing. She said, maybe you could, do it sometime, make some money. So she kind of showed me what she was doing, and next thing I know, she's working from home a few months later. And this is back when, you get these recordings of the medical records. They come on cassette. The doctors would dictate it, and you'd listen with these headphones and type it up. So she basically taught me how that worked, and I learned the terminology. And so I'm like 16, 17, and I'm starting to do that. And it paid pretty decent money, and I'm starting to rack up some spending money. So it turned out to be a pretty good thing. And about this time, I guess it was around 86, 87, a couple things musically changed for me. One was I heard this song on the radio that was kind of interesting. It's called Kaylee by this band Marillion. And I remember going in the store and I searched. I found the cassette and bought the cassette. And that same day I bought that, and then I bought Missing Persons, Coloring Your Life on vinyl. They didn't have the Marillion on vinyl, so I had to buy the cassette. But I really started to get into Marillion and wanted to find more of their stuff. So we went back to this flea market, and it turns out they had a whole bunch of Marillion stuff. One of the things the shop had at the flea market, Ace's Records, the guy was big into importing records. So I bought I found all these like picture discs and UK singles, 12-inch singles and stuff, and I'm like, this is awesome, And I bought some some 12-inch singles and picture discs of Yes and Asia and stuff there, but all of a sudden it was just like, this is cool, and it started to sink in. All right, here's what the deal was. This guy, his name is Frank Dansek, and he was a Vietnam vet. He'd served in Vietnam. He was a helicopter pilot. But he'd opened up a store, reading up in the history, I think in his obituary, he just died last year. But he'd opened a store, it said in Hudson, which may be the actual record store where I bought this Bruford album, because I don't think there were a lot of record stores up in Hudson back then. Started in Hudson and then moved to the Oldsmar Flea Market, which is probably right about the time I started going to the flea market. But he was big into heavy metal. This is probably about 86, 87, and the thrash metal scene was just starting to get big in Tampa. There's a studio there called Morris Sound Studio, and a lot of local acts were recording there, and I want to say like Morbid Angel and maybe Obituary. It's starting to get kind of big, and the word was getting out, and it actually drew in some like German bands, Nuclear Assault, I think that's it. Started bringing some of these bands internationally to record there, and the death metal scene just got huge in Tampa, and this guy was like one of the main drivers. He carried all that stuff in his store, and I want to say one of the guys from Morbid Angel, one of the guys in the band, actually worked at the shop every weekend. It was just open on the weekends. So yeah, his whole focus was like heavy metal, but he carried a lot of like European hard rock stuff. So I started to get into, I'm not even sure how it happened. It might have been this album, Wild Frontier, when the song Over the Hills and Far Away came out on the radio, I guess about 87. I remember really liking it, and got the cassette and really got into that, so I started buying all his other stuff. Well, this store had it all. It was pretty amazing, and I'll actually show some videos from the store. I found some YouTube videos, one where they're interviewing a guy and he's walking through the store talking about some of his favorite records, and another's kind of like a documentary about the whole heavy metal scene in Tampa, probably about the late 80s.
We're going to take this opportunity and walk through here, and I want to pick out a few albums that I think are like worth mentioning. See where we go. This is a band that I always got a lot out of. It's not really death metal, This band Black Flag, they've got one of the most intense vocalists ever. His name is Henry Rollins, and that was a real influence to me when that first came out. They had a couple other lineups before this, a couple other singers, but no one quite so extreme as Henry. Moving on down. I don't think we've got the particular album in stock because the new stuff is really not worth mentioning. I'm talking about Alice Cooper, but certainly the stuff prior to Welcome to My Nightmare, including that album and $1 Billion Babies, was something that I really admired a lot when I was growing up. This, a pillar of death metal. I'm talking about the Possessed Seven Churches album, a monument. Says it all right here. One of the original best death metal albums ever. Moving right along, obviously Slayer, a band that had an awful lot to do with the way music has progressed these days. This happens to be my favorite Slayer release right here, Hell Awaits. I think it's really aggressive. Now we stop. We stop at a band that gave us an awful lot to where we are these days. I'm talking about Venom. This is my favorite release of theirs, At War with Satan. I also like the, they have a single that they did, 12-inch single called Manitou, and that's a song that I always liked an awful lot. And the bass player from hell, the most underrated bass player, talking about Blackie from Voivod. This is an extremely intense album right here from a bass player's point of view. One of my favorites. And what a god he is. And that just about wraps it up, but we're going to walk up here up front. We've saved the best for last. We've saved the most influential for last. We have saved the most monumental, the most feelingful for last. And I'm talking about none other than Tony Iommi, Terrence Geezer Butler, Bill Ward, and of course vocalist Ozzy Osbourne. And this says it all. The new Black Sabbath box set has all the early stuff on it. And what can I say? They are responsible for metal, period. They're it. That's them right there. And there you have it. Thanks a lot.
What happened is that I'm not playing in Obituary anymore, and luckily this time, this is one departure from a band. It's definitely a real, friendly situation. I'm still really good friends with the guys in the band, and we still get along.
Ace's Records has been in Oldsmar for 5 years now. We started up in New Jersey about 10 years ago, and we've really built a heavy metal business here. There really wasn't any heavy metal here, and we've really grown from a small booth to a 2,000 square foot store. And we've got people like James Murphy from Obituary who works here, David Vincent from Morbid Angel. A lot of the local death bands come in here regularly. I think a lot of the kids that started with the traditional heavy metal and got into the death metal can't go back because there's so much energy in the death metal that anything less than that is just boring.
You can't tolerate inconsistency because, other tours were canceled. We were willing to do those tours, and for various reasons, Chuck wouldn't, go over to Europe and tour.
I think that it's getting really big. In terms of overrated, no, because there's a lot of good talent here. I think that the talent that's here is making it, and then there's like an entity that's trying to exploit the talent and make something somewhat of it's really becoming a trend. But I think the good bands that are good bands are going to survive, and the rest is just going to move on like they always do.
And so yeah, I started to really get into kind of the harder rock stuff. I bought a book about this time. It's called the Encyclopedia of Rock, and it gave kind of like a bio of the different bands and who was in the band and where they'd been from. And I think it actually had some of the family trees. The guy who draws like the rock family trees that show like the connections between different bands, what the musicians that were in one band, what they end up with. And what I noticed is, like with the whole European kind of hard rock scene, bands like Deep Purple and Whitesnake and Gary Moore and even Michael Schenker Group, a lot of these musicians just kind of floated around between bands, and Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath. And so they had a lot of musicians in common that would just float between bands. So I started to collect like a lot of the stuff that was related: Gary Moore, Michael Schenker Group, Deep Purple, Rainbow, Whitesnake, Ozzy Osbourne, all this stuff. Just started collecting, and especially buying like kind of the cool, neat special edition singles that came in little like gatefold things and like little deluxe packaging, picture discs, all that kind of stuff. And I had all this spending money. It was great. Yeah, so I started to amass this pretty amazing collection. And about the same time, I guess it was about 86, a TV station, this is really significant, a TV station started up in Lakeland, Florida, which is east of Tampa, kind of between Tampa and Orlando. And they didn't have any programming at first. And so what they did is they would play music videos.
Well, moving right along, 19 minutes before the hour, 12 o'clock, I am Freddie Rocket. We're going to be taking you all the way till 1 a.m. tonight, and then from 1 to 6 a.m., we're going to be doing nothing but Lovers in Love music. So you'll see all those videos for 6 full hours, 5 full hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 full hours, yeah. Back to whatever. I forgot. We'll have to see.
WTMV Channel 32, Lakeland, Tampa, Florida.
They'd have different time slots and kind of like different hosts, and they'd play like different music videos, and they were kind of geared. They had like a different theme to the show, but one was Carl Buell's, I used to think it was Metal Mania, but I didn't remember. It was actually Music Mania. But I think he played a lot of heavy metal videos. And then another show was Mike Pacelli, the Mike Pacelli Show. And this guy was actually a musician. He played guitar, and he actually did some like interviews on his show. There were guys who would come and they'd play in Lakeland at the Lakeland Civic Center, or they'd play in Tampa at the clubs or whatever. He'd interview some of them on the show, and I remember like in his the opening credits to the show, they showed like they had some scenes of him like talking with Alan Holdsworth, who played guitar with UK and Bruford, and he played with Soft Machine briefly. Just an amazing guitarist, and seeing him on this promo intro of this thing was really amazing. But he played with like Zakk Wylde, he played with Ozzy Osbourne, and they just kind of jam out in the TV studio, so it was pretty cool. But they played just like, you know, you get home from high school and I just turn it on and there'd be like, you know, like sometimes there'd be kind of like more pop stuff like Scritti Politti on, and Depeche Mode, which I was cool with it, you know, it was interesting. But they had like one block that was just pure heavy metal stuff, you know, like Metal Church and Dio and Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and Rainbow, just Yngwie Malmsteen, all this cool stuff that like. And my parents didn't have cable. They were like the slowest people in the world to get cable. I don't think we got cable until about 92. It's ridiculous. So we didn't have MTV, you know, never had MTV. So this was just like amazing to me, you know, just come home from school, pop it on, and jam out to that. So yeah, so that was you know, just kept buying more stuff and kind of amassed my huge collection. But then towards the end of high school, things started to change, you know. I ended up kind of unloading all my collection at a record collector show at the outlet mall. There was a local outlet mall. You know, at first the record collector shows, they used to be like in the Bayfront Center of this big, huge, I don't know, performance place down in St. Petersburg, Florida. But then they decided to move to, they built an outlet mall near my parents, and they actually do the show in the outlet mall. So in the aisles and stuff, people set up their booths. And somewhere around 89, 90, I just kind of decided to unload my whole collection. I don't know. You know, thinking back, I think I understand why. And I think part of the thing was by about the late 80s, it seemed like a lot of the bands and musicians I was into, things were changing. They were kind of losing steam. The singer from Marillion Fish had left the band. Gary Moore went from the hard rock stuff doing blues. The whole heavy metal scene was kind of petering out. It was all hair bands, or it was getting into the grunge like Nirvana and stuff like that. And it just seemed kind of like, you know, I'd hit the end of the road collecting these guys' stuff. Even like Michael Schenker, the Macaulay Schenker group, seemed to be losing steam about this time. And started, like, I had a friend, a good friend I got close to after high school. He was actually the little brother of my brother's best friend. And he was into like rap stuff like Public Enemy and Beastie Boys, and started to turn me on to that. So my musical taste started changing, and I started getting into more like kind of world beat music, you know, real briefly. But that led me into artists like Brian Eno and Robert Fripp, kind of the later King Crimson stuff and his solo stuff, and another guy named Bill Laswell. But yeah, I just gone to one of these record collector shows one day, and I just remember having a big stack of like all my Gary Moore and my Marillion and my Michael Schenker and my Deep Purple collectible stuff, and Ian Gillan's band, all this cool stuff. And I meant to go and trade it in to find some other stuff I was into. Well, it just turned out this time I couldn't find anything I was really interested in. So I ended up trading like probably $300-400 worth of stuff for maybe like $30 worth of CDs. It was just ridiculous, but I was kind of over it, and it's probably the biggest regret of my life. You know, I wish I just boxed this stuff up and put it in the closet, but that's what happened. But like I said at the beginning, I've been starting to kind of rebuild the collection, you know, picking up Marillion and Gary Moore and Michael Schenker and Yngwie Malmsteen and Alcatraz, things like that. So the second video I'll show my collection, but that was kind of my journey from prog rock to the hard rock scene. And yeah, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for the next video, which is I'll go through my collection. Alright, bye.